I love bonding with you all over connection bonding. We love bonding with you too. Any thoughts on the rise of citizen journalism? Lots of those guys are out on the streets live, and they also edit and publish their recorded content on the fly.
So, I mean, I assume like everyone else on your show, I didn't come on here just to plug Speedify, but I actually think this is a great demonstration. Something I've noticed, because there's a lot of sort of broadcast journalists always interested in this part of the world, is in broadcast journalism, connection bonding has been a big thing for a couple of decades now, and literally every time you see a news crew, they've got a couple of bonded cellular connections. There's a company called LiveView. I'm not sure if they're global or just here, and it's kind of been this like super complicated
at least they got bought like 2 years ago, but they were headquartered in Israel, but most of the engineers were actually in New Jersey, in the US. So they were sort of Israel and US.
That explains a lot then. So anyway, I see them, whether it's sort of CNN or Al Jazeera or anyone broadcasting. And I think that for the way the journalism is evolving, all these technologies, things that were considered sort of like out of reach for citizen journalists, it's guys like you, Speedify, actually really just about the only accessible solution, because I looked into the whole world of open sourcing connection bonding, and it's just like far too complicated. So I think it's super, super relevant. I think it should be probably a best practice that anyone who does a YouTube live or a Facebook live or whatever you're doing, cellular connectivity in this part of the world is very cheap. I know in the US it's a bit more, but just have a second connection. Even if you don't use a single packet from a second connection, just have it there. It gives you such peace of mind when you're doing a live, knowing it's not going to drop. You're not worrying, is the frame frozen? Is like, am I like stuck in a frame like this? So yeah, I think it's a big thing, and I think that sort of mainstream journalism, the dividing line between mainstream journalism and citizen journalism, is getting blurrier and blurrier by the year. And all these sort of traditional like heavyweight technologies like connection bonding, 100%, everyone doing a live stream should look at it do it as professionally as you can, and connectivity is number one, because if you're not connected, there is it's just end of show. Forget about your lighting, forget about your sound. If you don't have connectivity, it's not going to work.
So what I've been doing while live streaming, not to pitch my own stuff, but I pitch my own stuff, right, is the iPhone running Lyric's Broadcaster, and then Speedify, and I join the hotspot of another phone. So now I've got 2 cellular connections that I'm streaming over. And that tends to work pretty well. And you look afterwards, you'll see, one of them failed for a minute here, and one of them failed for a minute there, and just didn't affect the stream normally. So
cool. Yeah, that makes sense. The world of cellular connectivity is, something that most people prefer not to think about. But even sort of here, you have like there's about 6 different cellular companies. 3 or 4 of those are virtual mobile operators, so they don't actually have their infrastructure. So when you sort of, go down the rabbit hole of looking at Wikipedia, you realize, well, there's actually only about 3 different connectivities.
Yeah, that's what there's in the US, right?
Right.
There's AT&T, there's Verizon, and T-Mobile. And, there are all these other cellular companies, but they're all just selling one of those 3. Those are the only 3 networks in the country. All right, Marv ES, what do you think of fast journalism? Like how a story has to be short, concise, and doesn't need every detail.
I mean, that's definitely the way that sort of the internet is headed, like YouTube Shorts being super emphasized. I think there's a place for both, and I don't think we're seeing sort of classic documentary journalism disappearing, judging by what's on Netflix at the moment and all these streaming platforms. There's still a big market for it, but yeah, it's still very relevant. And I think you can definitely make the connection between streaming and shorts. Like if you do a stream, realistically, I almost think of it like sort of a rough first draft of a conversation. Like I know you guys pull out the highlights from the conversations on YouTube. So I think that's a pretty smart workflow, is kind of look at it as it's free flow. You can condense probably a 1 hour conversation to maybe like 5 minutes of real insights. And yeah, that's definitely the way the media market is evolving for sure.
Yeah, I keep thinking about, repurposing the content, right? So I run these interviews through Descript, and I get out the scripts of these conversations, and they're full of interesting things, but they're so long. It feels like I have an interesting book's worth of material, but I don't know. I don't quite have the time, energy, or discipline to figure out how to cook it down to a book someone would want to read.
Right. Yeah.
Any thoughts on that? Or
I'm not familiar with the platform, but yeah, I mean, I think that's I think of it as sort of different audiences. Like the people maybe tuning into the live stream are not necessarily the same people looking at the playback. But yeah, that's I haven't done book ghostwriting in a few years, unfortunately. So maybe my skills in this respect are a bit rusty, but it's always good to get insights.
All right, Tomboy says remote work is fun.
Fun until it destroys your soul.
Yeah,
and it's not fun.
Yeah, I think it's important to build in those rituals and dividing lines, so when you're at work and when you're not.
I actually had a dream once, Alex, and it's a pity because before I came on, I read this amazing blog. I was trying to find it earlier today. I didn't succeed. I know that Speedify can run on the server level on a Linux server, right? Mm-hmm. So I came across this wild blog, and at the time, it was about a year ago. I'm married. I rent an apartment. My wife is an architect. I probably have sort of a more stable life than or that one might imagine. Despite everyone thinks remote workers can just kind of like drop off and go digital nomading, right? So I just read this blog, and I had this like dream of, wow, I could probably go anywhere with a few cellular connections and just like do what this guy did, throw an old laptop in, set up a Linux server, get Speedify on it, and it was brilliant. But that actually is. I concluded after I've done remote working for probably 5 years now before the pandemic and whatever. I've concluded that digital nomading would not be for me, but I think if you are someone interested in it, doing stuff like connection bonding would actually be seriously empowering, because you can literally go anywhere. I mean, if you look at a sort of connectivity map, it's very hard not to have some kind of connectivity. I'm sure you could go to the Sahara Desert and even Starlink isn't there. But in sort of most semi-developed parts of the world, there is like something. And if you can get two small somethings together, you're gold. Yeah.
So a couple times during the pandemic, I'd say to my family, like, we could all just like rent an RV and get on the road.
Exactly.
And we could be anywhere. And every time, my family would simply stare at me in silence for about 30 seconds, and then they'd suddenly start talking about the weather or the sports, right? So
exactly. I mean, I've a hard enough time explaining what I do to my family, sort of being in one location. I can just imagine if I was telling them. So I got a van, and we're kind of like going around based on where the satellites are moving. But yeah, I mean, it's like it's totally possible, and it's actually interesting speaking about.
We've had multiple guests from Australia.
Yeah, they love their connection bonding. There's
like
two
Jim the fisherman, right? he's live streaming with Speedify, and he just goes wherever. Who's the other guy? Blanking on the name, but we've had multiple guests.
There's something I couldn't help but notice when I started Googling all this stuff about connection bonding and Speedify. Is two countries stood out sort of head and shoulders above the rest. One was India, which is kind of understandable. They don't have necessarily the best infrastructure there. They're really into like cellular is a huge thing. And the second one is Australia. And I was like, why are so many Australians into connection bonding? And then I read about it, their internet connectivity, the outback. So yeah, those are, I would suggest, the kind of two global epicenters, the Aussies and the Indians.
So Australia has weird issues that no other country in the world has, right? Because their population is more spread out than any other country in the world. Like
Interesting.
even the electricity grid has latency problems, right? No other latency grid, no other power grid in the world has latency problems except theirs.
Really?
So yeah, they did this big deal with Tesla, actually, where Tesla sold them huge numbers of batteries to put in various spots across the country to temporarily kick in just for a few seconds at a time. Because when somebody starts using power, it takes so long for that to make it back to the power plant for it to start putting out more power that you can just create a brownout. So yeah, so they have similar issues with cellular and stuff, right? So YouTube.
YouTube.
You've got stuff on YouTube, don't you?
I do. I put out a video today.
What you've been doing on YouTube? Yeah.
It's just kind of an experiment. It was my background is more in writing. As I mentioned, I did journalism and sort of stuff like that. And I always sort of thought video was going to be too expensive and too scary. So I started putting videos on YouTube a few years ago about really, really boring Linux stuff. So that I don't know if you have this problem, but do you ever like solve something and you can't remember how you figured it out like about 2 weeks later?
Yeah.
So that was the origin of my YouTube channel. I was like, I figured this out, but I'm probably going to forget this in a week. And started out as really boring videos about stuff like Linux that, very obscure. And yeah, it's just kind of a hobby. I became monetized a few months ago, and it makes barely enough to cover the ridiculous amount of camera gear that I buy. So, but it's fun. It's good. I feel like, and actually, just to kind of bring the conversation maybe more back to Speedify connection bonding. I put up stuff about that, and I was convinced like no one cared, and that's actually I think it's like 40,000 views. It's whatever video has the most views, and it was just like this kind of tutorial about using a load balancing router, and I was just amazed as these comments came in. I was like, what, you actually like someone you're actually like using the same router and trying to figure this stuff out. So yeah, there's real interest out there about all this.
It's kind of niche, but there's like 7 billion people in the world, right? I mean, it's something that only 1 in 1,000 people care about. There's like 7 million people that care about it, right?
I think it's probably 1 in 1,000 care about it, and maybe like 200 need to, but like out of those 200, 190 are not gonna like, they're just gonna be like, oh, screw it, the internet's out, and just gonna go to sleep. And it's like the kind of that like 1 in 10 that are gonna. I mean, I'll tell you how you find you guys. I was taking a Amtrak. My wife's American, so her parents live in Connecticut, and the internet on the Amtrak was very bad. So I had a weak Wi-Fi connection, and I had cellular data as well, and it was also kind of bad. But I was like, wait, what if I put these two things together? So I googled something like combine internet connections Reddit. I got onto the home networking subreddit, and then I got onto Speedify. So
you didn't see one of our posters?
I didn't see your poster, but I would say the folks on Reddit are tuned into this issue of connection bonding.
Years ago, we paid for posters to be put on the trains, on the Amtrak trains.
Really?
Between like Boston and Philadelphia. And we paid for them to be kept up for 90 days. And years later, people were contacting me like, oh, I was just in a train in Albany and I saw your poster. Or I was on the train to Florida and I saw your poster. They never took them down. And they just moved trains around until,
this
thousands of miles from where we paid to have the posters put up. People were seeing them years later.
This is the top. This is a genius tip for advertising budgets: is pick some place that there's not going to be that much competition. I mean, I'm just going to say people on the Amtrak, they've got the window or the Speedify poster, so their eyes are going to go back to the Speedify poster. Exactly, as it is that you guys got a great return on investment. I mean, I was just at the point of there's no data, and obviously us all being millennials with sort of fickle attention spans, the first thing in our mind goes to how can I get data. You guys, it really shows how well online advertising works, because it just took a couple of searches and straight to connection bonding, which I assume, like most people, I'd never heard of that before.
your tech, like I see you have obviously a very fancy high-tech microphone there. What equipment do you use when you're making your videos?
So actually, this is the first time I've used my webcam in a long time, and yeah, I use a camcorder. Actually, I'm a big proponent of the of camcorders. They are, sort of old school, but they're making a comeback, which is so exciting for me to see, because I feel like when I was looking to get into video, my first I was looking. It was when I was in the US, and people not in the US, we don't have the amazing Amazon Prime service that you guys have and take for granted. So I was like, well, I'm in the US for a week, I have to I'm gonna get my camera. So I went straight for a camcorder, and then only discovered afterwards that people think of them as sort of like, your uncle at the barbecue is the super geeky, or the soccer mom. And yeah, no, it's fantastic. So I'm actually using a webcam, because they're using this weird world of Linux. It's always a headache to get the capture cards and compatibility in OBS. So it's easier to use a webcam. But yeah, I use a camcorder, and I like to think of myself as, I don't look for the fanciest stuff, but I use what works, including this microphone. It's the Audio-Technica AT2020. It's been around for about 50 years, and it's just good. So I use it. Yeah.
Not that much revolution in microphone technology, right?
There actually is crazy little revolution in microphone technology. Like some of the biggest microphones, the Shure SM58, it's actually very interesting, because you see, in the world of startups, I'm sure you see all these sort of, we talked about ChatGPT and all these sort of dips and peaks in the world of emerging tech. And then I feel like beneath that, you've got a lot of stability. It's almost like sort of it's almost like a river. The surface is moving very quickly, and I'm gonna try keep this analogy going here. And then the bottom of the river is slowly. So yeah, microphones are surprising. You've got microphones going for 60 years that are industry standard. And I mean IPv4, IPv6, right? It's been a slow transition as well. So the essential parts of the internet move slowly.
Marby says, either microphones are amazing and cost as much as a car, or
I probably got the date wrong.
One from 1986.
I actually think I might have one from 1986. Not the microphone that I have, but the AT2020 has been around for ages, and the Shure SM58 for even longer than that. So yeah, they actually go back that far.
And what software do you use for those YouTube videos?
So I use Kdenlive, which is kind of a sort of it's the main video editor we have in the world of Linux, and it does a good job. It kind of does everything. I think from the vast majority of people not trying to, and honestly, the truth is, you could probably, I wouldn't say you could produce Hollywood movies on Kdenlive, but you could probably produce sort of indie movies. I think there's a lot to be said for sort of using basic software, because most software does more than you need to do, and Kdenlive is the same. There's a ton of features I never used, and yeah, my videos aren't super amazingly produced. I want to learn animation. That's my kind of thing at the moment. I'm trying to learn that, but it gets the job done. So yeah.
What software are you looking at for animation?
Animation, I'm just at the very start. There is one called OpenTunes, which is like an across Adobe Animation is kind of the industry standard one. But yeah, it's a question of, it's a very, very long and patient process. Not everyone has patience for it, and I have a feeling I'll be one of those people who don't. But I'm gonna give it a shot anyway, because you can just do so much. You can explain so much in one of those sort of graphic animations. I think it's an amazing skill to have. So that's what I'm working on.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified when we post more tech talks, interviews, and tutorials.